standing on the roof of the Schrödinger building at the Oxford Science Park. The science park that you can see all around you is now 60% owned by Magdalen College and is our largest asset. And today, with the help of Rory Maw, the Chief Executive of the park, and some of the people doing extraordinary work here, we're going to tell you what the park is and why it's so important. So hello, Rory.
Dinah, hi.
Rory, you were a bursar at Magdalen. Can you tell us a bit about the history of the park, where it comes from and why it's so important to Magdalen?
It was founded in the late 1980s by my predecessor, but two, I think, Keith Wills. And Keith had a vision that there was nothing really going on in science parks in and around Oxford. Cambridge had got its science park that Trinity had set up. There wasn't an equivalent here, and I think Keith spotted that opportunity, bought this land in 1988. So it's about 70 acres. And since then, we've been on a steady progression, really three phases of development. So the first decade, the college entered a joint venture with Prudential. It was run by the college and the Prudential, developing the first 8 buildings. That was through the 1990s. 2000s, there was another period of development, another 7, 8 buildings, slightly larger, slightly better architecture. You'll see as you walk around, there's a bit of a trend on that, and we're trying to improve it as we go. And then really the kind of seminal change was in 2015 when we bought the Prudential out. So the college took 100% ownership and started the third phase of development. So we're standing on the roof of the first building that was part of that, the Schrödinger building. And this building carried on the tradition of naming buildings after Magdalen-linked Nobel Prize winners. So this is named after Erwin Schrödinger, who was the great intellectual hero of your predecessor as president of the college. And we're delighted to have this building named after him. And this building really exemplifies in many ways what we're trying to do at the park today. So it started out as being multi-let. I think we had 7 or 8 different companies in here. And it tells a bit of a story of the success of one of them, Exscientia. I think they first arrived here in 2018 when the building was finished with about 20 people, half of one floor. They now have about 70% of this building. The building was originally about 25% lab, 75% office. That's now reversed. The building is about 75% laboratories. And that's what we're seeing across the park and around Oxford as life science has become really such an important element of the local economy here. So on the park now, we have about 70 companies based here, ranging from 2 or 3 people in a lab, very much at the startup end, through to large international companies like Exscientia, like Oxford Nanopore, that between them have probably 1,000 people employed here on the park.
Remarkable. How many people work here in total, Rory?
There are about 3,500 people who would describe themselves as based here. I reckon on a typical day, it's probably about 2,500 are working here.
And we can see buildings are still going up. Over in the distance, we can see an exciting looking steel frame going up. What's that?
So that is our next building. That is named after the Iverson building, named after Sue Iverson, who's a leading experimental psychologist, who's a fellow of Magdalen. That building is due to be completed next summer. And that's really carrying on this evolution that I was talking about. That will be the largest single building we've put up, about 88,000 square feet and up to 70% laboratory space. So again, that trend of much more focus on life science.
That Magdalen entered into a major financial transaction last year, which transformed the ownership structure of the park and also had a significant impact on the college's endowment.
Yes, that's right. About 2 years ago, it became very clear to the college that the scale of the opportunity here was probably beyond the college's ability to fund it itself.
How many square feet do we have planning permission for at the moment?
So we have either under construction or in planning, almost 700,000 square feet.
700,000 square feet. Okay.
And today there are 500,000 square feet. So it's more than doubling the scale of the park in about 3 years.
Okay. So
you can imagine that's a major capital commitment, and that was really beyond the financial capacity of the college to do that by itself. So we ran a process to find a partner, a new joint venture partner at the top part level. And since September, we've been in a joint venture with GIC, which is the sovereign wealth fund of the state of Singapore. So GIC bought 40%, and are helping to fund the development of the Iverson and Leggett buildings, and then the next phase of development.
It's obviously incredibly exciting for the college financially because of the significant impact on the endowment. But much more than that, it's incredibly exciting scientifically. Quite a lot of the companies here are companies that have spun out of research done by Magdalen Fellows and by fellows in other colleges in Oxford. And what they're doing is vitally important work with huge health benefits.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, really what matters is the impact on global health challenges.
Yes.
So, for example, we had 10 companies here actively engaged during the COVID pandemic on lots of different aspects of that. So, from reagents for testing kits, through vaccine technology, and, for example, Oxford Nanopore genetic sequencing, which enabled rapid and distributed sequencing of variants of COVID and tracking that in a way that enabled people to target it more carefully. So, we're incredibly proud of what the companies are doing here. We probably have 6 or 7 companies here that were founded by or co-founded by current Magdalen Fellows.
Wonderful. Yes.
So,
and we also have former students from Magdalen who are working in those companies.
We do, that's right. Yeah. One of the reasons that some of these companies are based here is because of the access to the talent pool that's coming out of the universities in Oxford.
Yeah.
But that, creates employment in a whole range of different areas and supports the Oxford economy in an enormous way.
Thank you very much, Rory. I'm here in the laboratories of Oxford Endovascular with Mike Karim, the CEO of Oxford Endovascular. So tell me a bit about Oxford Endovascular. What do you actually do here? What do you make?
So in a sentence, we are developing origami engineering to treat brain aneurysms. We're developing a micro stent that goes in the groin area,
Yes.
passes all the way up into the brain, across a weakness in the blood vessel, causing it to shrink, heal, and disappear. So that's what we're about.
That's amazing. And tell me, where does the company come from?
So the company spun out at the end of 2015 from Oxford University, Magdalen College. Prior to that, there was about 5 years of work that went on with 2 professors. One was a medic, Professor James Byrne, and the other is a professor of engineering science. They got together.
And John Yu is a fellow of Magdalen.
That's right.
Yes.
John is a fellow of Magdalen, and they together had a research grant that came from the Wellcome Trust. And they worked for 5 years to develop origami engineering concepts.
What is origami engineering?
So it's to do with how structures can fold down into very small spaces and then open up. So obviously it comes from the ancient art of paper folding, but John did a lot of work on the European Space Project on satellites. So if you can imagine how satellites open up from a small capsule and then collapse down when they're coming back to Earth, that concept he managed to translate across into developing a stent. And this is an image of our stent structure in the early days.
So what's it made of?
So it's made of a very special alloy called nickel titanium alloy. It's a super elastic alloy, but the secret is in the design and how that design is translated into a structure that can be laser cut using a laser cutting machine. And then you produce this device which stretches and shrinks and collapses down into about 1/3 of a millimeter diameter and then opens up to precisely the right shape and size inside the blood vessels in the brain.
So you started out with pure scientific research, and you've now got a commercial company, a full commercial operation. And how does that work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the research has to develop some sort of fundamental proof of concept to attract the attention, of the university and of potential investors. But ultimately, it's got to be meeting a need. And the need here is that brain aneurysms are extremely common. they affect 1 in 50 people. That translates into there being a market out there which investors are interested to put money into and help to develop a company. So back at the end of 2015, after about a year and a half of work with the university and building plans, marketing plans, and attracting investors, we were able to then spin the company out. We raised an initial £2 million to get the company off the ground. Then the real work starts, because you have to build a team of very experienced engineers to take that proof of concept to a product that can be commercialized. And that is quite a journey.
Tell me, where are you manufacturing your stents? How does your supply chain work?
We had to look where in the world we could actually get this laser cut device produced, various different component parts. Most of the basic manufacturing is done in Germany, which produce the laser cut frame and then a sleeve that goes over the top. They then come in to just outside Oxford, actually in Abingdon here. It's assembled, and in Abingdon we produce the delivery system, which actually gets it through the groin area and then up into the brain. So this did not exist. So there is an original equipment manufacturer in Abingdon, which became a business out of our spin out. We helped them start to get the money together. We are building a medical device ecosystem here in the Oxford area. And during the COVID period, it flourished and was able to employ about 20 new graduate students as budding engineers who are now growing into their careers in the Oxford area. That wouldn't have happened had we not been able to spin out of Magdalen College.
Fantastic. I'm with Constantin Coussios, the Director of the Institute of Biomedical Engineering at Oxford University and a Fellow of Magdalen College, Oxford. Hi, Constantin.
Hi, Dinah.
And it's lovely to see you here in your natural environment in the Science Park. I believe you have how many companies here?
I have 3 companies that I've had the pleasure of co-founding here at the Science Park.
And what are they called?
OrganOx Limited, Oxonix Limited, and Orthoson Limited.
Okay, so these are companies that have spun out of your research as an academic biomedical engineer. So tell us about how your research started and how it's led to commercial applications. Where did you start?
I set off to be an aeronautical engineer when I was deciding what undergraduate degree to do, and very quickly realized that that was a great technological space for me, but there was something missing. And what I realized was missing were people. And what helped me realize that something was missing was an extraordinary cross-disciplinary encounter with a transplant surgeon called Peter Friend, who happens to be the chair of transplantation here at Oxford University. Peter and I have now worked together for over 25 years, and he inspired me to take the engineering knowledge I had and apply it not to aircraft and to machines, but to improving the therapy of human conditions. And the first thing we got to work on together was improved preservation of organs, which became OrganOx.
So OrganOx is a system for preserving organs for transplantation, is that right?
Absolutely. So traditionally organs are kept on ice.
Yes.
And in the case of the liver, for example, that would give them a maximum preservation time of 8 to 12 hours.
Yes.
And that has the major problem that the organ is not functioning during preservation. So there is no way of determining whether the organ is working or not until you put it in the recipient. What we developed with Peter was the first way of keeping organs alive outside the body during preservation.
Wow.
And in the words of Wired magazine in 2013, we created a machine that can be described as follows. This machine is so good, your liver will never know you're gone. So
you're basically keeping livers alive outside the body?
Correct. We have created effectively all of the components that are needed in order to fool an organ into thinking it is still inside the body when in fact it is outside.
Wow. And how long can your organs survive outside the body?
So the current devices that have been taken through clinical trials and for commercial use enable 24 hours.
Yes.
But experimental studies, not only in Oxford but now elsewhere, have shown that it is possible to do so for several days, up to 5 days and possibly 7 days.
Wonderful. And while when you put the organs into your machine, can you actually improve the quality of the organ while it's in the machine?
The main benefit of placing the organ on the device is that it makes it possible for the implanting surgeon to assess the organ. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if an organ is perceived as being risky, it ensures that there is some quantitative information to determine whether that organ is likely to function once inside the recipient. Mm-hmm. But we currently have 2 clinical studies in collaboration with the university and the company, supported by the National Institute for Health Research, which are specifically looking at an intervention during the preservation period. So can we make organs better? Potentially, yes. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways is, for example, by removing fat from organs that are so mm-hmm. fatty that they couldn't be transplanted without that intervention.
So what were the main challenges you had to overcome if you're trying to preserve livers outside the body?
So one of the key challenges with livers in particular is that they massively change their blood flow depending on whether someone is sleeping or eating. And therefore, one has to develop a system that can comply with what the liver wants, mm-hmm. not what we wish to tell it should want. Mm-hmm. The second major challenge is that it is actually, there was no information when we started about what the oxygen or nutrition demands of an individual organ actually were. Mm-hmm. This information was known for humans, but we simply did not know what it was for individual organs. And all of that knowledge we had to develop in an academic setting. The second was to actually use the fantastic support that is provided by the university and the college in order to create an investment proposition and identify not only investors, but also a seasoned management team with mm-hmm. commercial experience to guide the academics through these subsequent steps. Once that was created, the company was capitalized in January 2009, and it has, I'm delighted to report, has been based at the Magdalen Science Park ever since, which has been a transformative location for its development.
Talking about OrganOx in relation to livers, but as I understand it, this is a completely new prototype of a machine also produced by OrganOx, which deals with kidneys. Is that right?
That's correct. This is actually part of a highly prolific collaboration with the University of Oxford. It's emerged from a joint grant supported by the National Institute for Health Research to develop the world's first automated normothermic kidney perfusion device. Mm-hmm. And what you're looking at here is one of only a handful of prototypes available in existence today. At the center of it lies the organ, which in this case is a human kidney, which is being preserved for transplant. Mm-hmm. And the key components are actually how one replicates the functions of the human body around this kidney in order to fool it that it is still within the body. So at the bottom here, you have a centrifugal pump, which actually performs the function of the heart. You have what's called a membrane oxygenator, which performs the function of the lungs. And so blood is essentially pumped out of the kidney through the renal vein, and it goes then straight into a reservoir. And mm-hmm. from this reservoir, it is actually pumped or sucked on by the heart in order to generate a high pressure. That high pressure goes through the artificial lung in order to generate arterial pressure and oxygenated blood that then comes back in through the renal artery.
So you've got a miniature cardiovascular system in this machine?
We have a miniature cardiovascular system where everything needs to be very tightly automated so that there are only 3 buttons to operate this device: play, stop, and eject.
Amazing. What stage is this device at?
We have just completed our 27th successful kidney transplant here at the Churchill Hospital in Oxford.
Using this machine?
Using this device, and to demonstrate with escalating levels of risk that the intervention is safe. And following completion of that trial at the end of 2022, we will then be proceeding to a larger regulatory trial to enable it to be in patients by 2024, 2025 on a larger scale.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinah.
With me now is Fiona Reid. Fiona is an Associate Professor of Bioscience Entrepreneurship at UCL and former Director of the Oxford Centre for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Hello, Fiona.
Hello.
Fiona is also an alumna of Magdalen College.
That's right.
In fact, we were friends when you were at Magdalen.
Yes. I was studying chemistry.
You were studying chemistry and organising a wonderful ball.
Oh, yes. Well, maybe not so successfully on that one.
Is it true that you let the deer out?
It is true that I let the deer out.
But that didn't stop you having an extremely successful career as an expert in science, innovation and entrepreneurship.
Yes. I've always been interested in working at the science-business interface, and that's taken me into a number of different roles.
So tell me, what is the importance of science parks? Why are they a good thing for entrepreneurship?
Well, science parks all over the world are thought to be adding value in a number of different ways, one of which is the geographical concentration of companies that are all roughly doing the same types of things. That offers a learning environment and also connection to other people, and those people are usually university people, but sometimes also there are other industry partners, and it's helpful to have everyone in one place such that you can connect into one unit.
So you've seen the Oxford Science Park up close. How does it strike you as the importance of the Oxford Science Park in particular?
This is a very powerful environment here. I mean, there are a number of really amazing companies that have been here, that have started here and have grown and accelerated and amplified the value that they bring, social value as well as economic value too. It's a powerful learning environment because it's connected to the university, and the university supplies it with new knowledge and with good people, which are really the primary outputs of universities. And so as a result, it's constantly sort of generating. It's a dynamic environment, but it's constantly generating value, and it's also regenerating itself in terms of the companies and the types of companies that it has here too. So it's an extremely important resource for the Oxford ecosystem, and that's the wider Oxford ecosystem, university connecting in with the local economy and in many other manifestations apart from that.
And of course, also very important for the national economy.
Absolutely.
It's a massive engine of growth for the UK, the innovation that's happening in this 70 acres of land that we're sitting in.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you look at the data, I sometimes think that worldwide we don't talk about it enough, because everyone knows about Silicon Valley and the high density and the particular nature of innovation and tech innovation that happens there. But we don't talk as much about what happens in the UK. And we don't particularly talk about perhaps enough of what happens in Oxford, because Oxford's reputation has got many different reputational assets, but the science economy and the source of ideas that create growth companies is perhaps slightly undersold in the UK and nationally. It is extremely powerful. There are many, many companies that are very well connected with each other, with venture communities, and the people who use that type of innovation.
I mean, people talk about the Golden Triangle, don't they? About Oxford, Cambridge and London as being this extraordinary hotspot of economic growth. Oxford had a very high profile during the pandemic because of the development not only of the vaccine, but also treatments for COVID and public health developments in relation to COVID.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very interesting example whereby we have a very rapid acceleration of the pipeline that goes between laboratory bench and ideas and the basic science right the way through to being implemented in people. And it was the original science that was done here. We had manufacturing sites that were able to prototype the manufacturing. There was Oxford Biomedica, that was a spin-out company that was actually doing the biochemical engineering around producing that vaccine, which is a critical part of it, as well as all the public health people who could help us implement it. So it was as if many different parts of a usually very complex, diffuse pipeline of innovation were concentrated in a short period of time and able to be made real in the world to enormously beneficial effect.
It's very exciting for me to see a place like this connected to Magdalen.
Yes.
You know, that Magdalen, this kind of wonderful historic institution, is now also the incubator of this extraordinary centre of innovation.
Yes. And I think sometimes that's a really useful reframing of things, because people do tend to think of Magdalen and Oxford as being these beautiful buildings and looking at the history. And they sometimes don't realise the extent to which the people who work in these institutions in the college are absolutely at the cutting edge of change and are generating the new knowledge that can make that change happen in the world.
And what does that mean for students studying at Oxford and studying at Magdalen?
Okay. I think students could gain a lot of value from knowing that there are lots of different companies that exist out there in the world that are beyond the perhaps 2 or 3 things they seem to be shown at careers services generally.
In many cases, of course, we see that there's a direct pipeline from students studying as postgraduates, getting their DPhils at Oxford, and then moving straight into employment in the science park. And one of the CEOs I was talking to over lunch today told me that something like 20% of his employees have Oxford DPhils.
I mean, that's primarily the reason why science parks are co-located next to universities. This is a source of recruitment.
Yes.
There is a constant stream of talented, ambitious, good people coming out of that university.
Fantastic. So what we have here, basically, is a cutting-edge community that's part of the research ecosystem, converting ideas into applications that will save thousands, perhaps millions of lives and generate enormous potential for economic growth and value.
And as we saw during the pandemic, that was exactly what happened. And
Yes.
that same process happens in companies, in other types of companies that are perhaps less easily identifiable, but that is still happening. And it's often a great motivator for students nowadays to be very purpose-driven. So they want to have some sense of strong values within the organizations that they work for. They do have choices, and that is one of the choices they are more and more making, is to do something useful with their science or do something useful with their talents. And the Science Park has got this wonderful sort of merged purpose of sometimes social growth, sometimes economic growth, sometimes servicing that growth in itself. So we have right here on the doorsteps of Magdalen this extraordinary environment, which is, you know, I think also inspirational for students.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you.
We've seen a very different side of Magdalen at the Science Park, not the Magdalen of ancient libraries and towers and beautiful grounds and deer parks, but the Magdalen which is the cutting-edge scientific community translating basic research into extraordinary applications, saving lives. I hope you've enjoyed finding out more about the park. I've had an amazing time here. Thank you.